So I'm going swimming in a minute or two, but I thought I would like to share with you my thoughts more on Joel Duggar Dillard's book, Counting the Cost. This is the infinite review and examination of what's going on. If you don't know who I am, I'm Suzanne Titkemeyer. I used to write for Pathos. I had a column called No Longer Quivering that I wrote every single day for 10 years, looking at quiverful evangelical type religions and some of the things that go haywire. These are just my opinions. Don't believe buddy I'm talking about, please. And I got to go by my notes. I'm having some problems with YouTube right now, which is why I'm going back to doing uploaded videos for now until they fix whatever I got going on. So I left Jill and Derek talking to TLC and the father-in-law, Jim Bob, who I'm just going to throw this out to start. I didn't like Jim Bob Duggar before I read the book. I had some thoughts about him, but the more I've read the book, it's way worse than anything I possibly dreamed of for a petty, tin-plated tyrant of a father. So, that being said, he's way worse than ever dreamed. And this is some of what I'm talking about. So he had hired a PR guy named Chad, okay? And Chad was acting like a liaison between TLC and the kids. So as we left it, TLC was trying to make Jill and Derek show up in Houston to do some PR type filming and questioning there. And they said, no, we're in El Salvador. We're not coming back. We have a commitment until July or August. We're not coming back. And that's reasonable if you're going all that way. So PR Chad kept contacting them, insisting they had to show up at Houston. The network offered to buy them all the stuff that they needed for their home in El Salvador. And I'm going to tell you, that is not an insignificant list, I'm sure, because my home in Costa Rica, every time I fly back to the States, I end up bringing back, last time I brought back 3 full suitcases. I tell you something of things that you cannot obtain here that I really wanted to make my house a little more comfortable. So there's that. And the network offered to buy those things. That's pretty big. That's a pretty big amount of money. So I got to give them some props for that. So Jill and Derek kept repeating their commitment to Mike in El Salvador. And Mike was the guy who ran the ministry thing they were part of. And he kept saying, we have committed to being here through July or August, through the end of the year. And we're not just going to throw that aside to go film in February in Houston. Jill and Derek started being pestered by Jim Bob and Michelle because they wanted them. Jim Bob and Michelle were insisting they be in Houston for the filming as well. They still refused, but offered to film from El Salvador, however the way they wanted, for them to film and then ship it to them, or for TLC to send a camera crew down there. They were okay with any of that. And Chad was really turning up the heat on them. So Derek called up Chad on the phone and said, no, definitive no. Chad told Derek that Jill had a contractual obligation to go. Derek was very suspicious, as well he should be. And was suspicious of the whole idea of the contract. But Jim Bob had tricked Jill into signing that contract right before the wedding, the night before the wedding. But they wouldn't show them a copy of the contract. So he was very suspicious about that because he didn't have a copy of it. Started increasing the pressure. Chad started calling back, and Jill's pops, Jim Bob, kept calling and saying that this was not the hill to die upon at the filming. Jill was so angered, and angry is not something that women are taught to deal with in evangelical quiverful. you're taught that anger is wrong and dangerous. So it gives you all kinds of weirdness if you're starting to have those kind of anger and you're doing it and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm sitting. So this was a pretty big moment for Jill. Jim Bob next tried to guilt him into this only 3 days before the filming was supposed to take place. He was turning the screws, okay, and really trying to push this thing. He even said this isn't like you, sweet chili muffin. Is Derek behind this? Are you having problems financially? Are you depressed? Literally none of his business unless somebody in that family decides to share that information with him, but not his. To even ask those questions is just horrible. So Jill says there's a new hard edge to her father's calls and comments. And he kept saying everything is going to get messed up without explaining what the everything was that was going to get so messed up. He even went so far as to try to guilt her by saying if the new show Counting On was canceled, it was 100% her fault. Ah. And I can't read my note. Jim Bob Duggar suggests something flipping. I can't remember what I wrote down or what it means. It looks like corn flipping, but what in the heck is corn flipping? I don't know. It says, and Jim Bob Duggar said, you're going to get sued, quote unquote. So they did something pretty miraculous in that mindset. They stopped taking Jim Bob Duggar's calls. They just would not talk to him anymore, let him call again and again and again and again. And that's really hard to do because here we have Jill who's dealing with anger, which she's told is a sin. She has anxiety about this, which she's told is a sin. She has a sense of panic about this that she's been told is a sin. So she's very quiet about all of this because to speak up on these things, you've been told that's a sin as well in IBLP. She was afraid. She said she thought God might be punishing her, that they might be stepping out from under the stacked umbrella theology of Bill Gothard, and started feeling better about it, though, as time went on, about her decision and the whole 9 yards. And then Michelle and Jim Bob do the most passive aggressive, what am I saying? Not passive aggressive, the most hostile thing of all times. They effing show up. They show up in El Salvador without any kind of notice, nothing. They just show up. They show up and just move right on in with them. Now, Jim Bob is almost apologetic. I think he realizes that he's coming very close to losing any kind of influence on his daughter at all. But Jill and Derek refused to be moved, and they stuck it out until August, like they were contractually obligated to do. They moved back to the States in August of 2016. And they only planned to be stateside for a few months to attend 2 weddings, both Ginger Duggar's wedding and Derek's brother's wedding, and to do the required filming of the show so they wouldn't get sued. Jill said she dreaded going home, and the closer they got to home, the more her anxiety increased, the worse she felt. That's understandable. And they finally had received a few pages of the contract that Jill had signed. Not the entire contract, but just a few small pages. She said she was furious and kept waiting for Jim Bob to chew her out, as per usual, and yell in the whole 9 yards, but it didn't happen. When they were stateside and they were filming and doing the things they needed to do, Jill found out she was pregnant again. But it meant that they could not return to El Salvador for a 3rd year because in 2016, Zika virus was all over or as they say here, virus. The virus was here. Um, all over Central America at the time, the Zika virus. And so they had to wait until they got to the end of the year to go back to El Salvador so that she would be closer to the second trimester because Zika apparently affected women primarily in the early stages of their pregnancies. And it's kind of funny, I live here and I saw all the warnings in 2016 when we were visiting. You don't even see those anymore. I don't know what happened with Zika, but apparently it's not a thing here anymore. Maybe they were misunderstanding what the evidence was. But I don't blame Jill because at the time they were saying that Zika was causing mental retardation in babies. They had an October family meeting called Jim Bob was calling. And here we hear something that I did not know. Jim Bob shared that Josh had a few new struggles without explaining what those new struggles were. So he was being spun into an all new business, used cars. Pay no attention to that sound. It's just my cat with asthma. I've got to give her treatment here very shortly. When I'm done with this, her and I will sometimes do treatments together. Jim Bob had a new offer for the kids. He offered to give each one of them $80,000. Okay. And he was going to give each child over the 18 $80,000. Jim Bob said that this gift came about because of the conversation that Derek had had with him saying, hey, you never paid us for filming. And so it made Jim Bob start thinking that he needed to give some sort of payment to shut that sort of thing down. Oh, so they were bracing for impact, Derek and Jill. They just had to sign some sort of new contract and a non-disclosure agreement. He wanted a non-disclosure agreement, a permanent one in place that they would not be able to get out of, but they wouldn't be able to speak about Jim Bob, Michelle, or any of this crap ever again, or money. Derek and Jill had many questions. There was some angle to this, they both felt, and surely there was. Jim Bob demanded that once this payment took place, that none of them ever discuss money with him ever again. This was supposed to just shut it down cold. So they waited for the agreement, Jill and Derek. They got it. It was a 4-page agreement. It committed them and the other children, to 7 more years of servitude to Jim Bob Duggar's company, Mad Family Incorporated. It owned their likenesses. It allowed him to keep filming for the 7 years, and they would have no say-so in it. They'd be paid, it said in the contract, but they would not be allowed to negotiate, and they must sign NDAs that committed them forever. So 7 years of possible filming and non-disclosure agreements that shut down any kind of talking about the family at all forever. Jill and Derek refused to sign. I don't blame them. It's a crap contract, and it was obviously another Jim Bob Duggar stunt designed to hold on to his secrecy, his control, and force obedience on the grown and married children to keep his control over all of them. Jill said most of her siblings were scared enough to obey. Scared of their father and what he might do. Think about that one for a minute. She said it felt too unsafe to sign. She's still asking for a full copy of the previous contract she had signed. Jim Bob was extremely resistant. He didn't want to give them anything. They had a very unfriendly conversation about this entire thing in Branson, Missouri, when the entire family was there visiting that park they used to like there, Silver Dollar City, I think it is. I've never been there, but I'm not a big theme park person. Jim Bob shows up at their home with a check for the $80,000 and tells them they can just have it. They don't have to sign the contract to have it, that this is the one time gift. So Jill goes about trying to hire a lawyer to sue In Touch and all law enforcement that complied with the FOIA request, the Freedom of Information Act request that released the information. And new brother-in-law Jeremy found them a lawyer in the Los Angeles area that would take the case on contingency, because that was the problem. Most lawyers wanted money to pursue this thing, but none of them had enough money to be hiring a lawyer to pursue a lengthy, expensive court battle. So it was going to have to be somebody who was pretty confident he could win and recoup the costs of the lawsuit. So they were preparing for their El Salvador return. Michelle and Jim Bob wanted to know about filming and what they were going to do. Jill and Derek wanted to just quit the show outright. Oh, I'm sorry. It wasn't just Michelle. It was IMB, the company that they were doing. And I'm going to call it a company rather than a ministry, because I know for a fact that a lot of these quote ministries are nothing more than companies with a 501c3 designation, so they don't have to pay taxes. So the International Missions Board, I think that's what IMB stands for, wanted to know about the filming because they weren't going to be able to fund them as missionaries, allow them to join the program as long as they were filming. So Jim Bob was putting pressure on them to stay filming. Jill and Derek decided not to film, that they wanted to quit the series. The IMB said they needed documentation that filming was 100% over before they could let them be any part of their organization. She says that it felt liberating to say that they were going to quit. They resigned via email, called their folks and let them know. They called Jim Bob and Michelle and told them. TLC wanted to talk with Jill and Derek, but PR Chad butted into the TLC conversation and correspondence and was trying to steer the whole thing. TLC did something really horrible here. They refused to give them the paperwork accepting the ending of them filming. Refused the thing they needed to be able to give to the IMB. Said, no, we're not doing that. And then they were in El Salvador. Something really bad happened. German, he was their bodyguard that they had to let go at some point for some reason. He was murdered after they let him go. Now, this is a story that Katie Joy and many others have been talking about for years. Here's what they claimed, and it is definitely a rumor with no credence, but I'm going to go ahead and repeat it so you know what we're dealing with some of these people like Katie Joy Paulson and Without a Crystal Ball. They were saying that Derek was gay and that German had been his gay lover, and then when he left, Derek was afraid he would say something, and so Derek had him killed. That was a rumor that was for ages going around. I didn't believe it. I thought it was too much of a twist, even for a member of the Duggar family, even an extended satellite member. But this is what was being pushed on a lot of the websites that are pure gossip and speculation with zero influence whatsoever. They returned in May of 2017 to the area. And they needed to see what was happening because Chad's fundraising had slowed to a positive trickle. They weren't receiving much in the way of funding from their website that Chad was supposed to be generating fundraising for them. TLC was still refusing to release them, and IMB could wait no longer. They said no. Jill said they had no jobs, they had a new baby on the way, and no jobs, no money coming in. TLC asked to film the birth again, and they told him absolutely no, no way. Good for them. PR Chad quit them, quit the fundraising. And Chad went into the account and took $1,500 from the ministry account. Now, exactly why they didn't call the law on him and file charges, I don't know. Because if it had been me and he'd have been fundraising for me and that money was sitting there and he took it, I would have been calling. But that's me. They said they finally finished filming with TLC and it was over with. Jim Bob and others told them that suffering was good because suffering brings about a closeness with God, and that's a lie I heard promoted from the pulpit in my old church too. That my mother used to say, you have to suffer to be beautiful, which used to piss me off so badly because she was talking about having her hair done and putting on makeup and stuff, which is not the same way as it is pushed in IBLP and just about everywhere else in the evangelical world, which was if you are suffering, you are closer to God, you're going to be pulled closer to God. And if your suffering comes from your critics, you are going to be seated at the right hand of the Father and beloved because that suffering brings you closer and proves what a true Christian you are. Again, BS. I call BS. Serving God through all things, such as the critics even. Jill described the birth of their second child, and it was not a good one either. It sounds from everything she said like she had disassociated during that birth. They started having fetal distress, and they had to have another C-section. They started cutting into Jill without the anesthesiologist completely numbing her up first. They were using just local injections. That's how serious the situation was. She was having a uterine rupture and they were having such excessive bleeding. It was like they had to get in there and not worry about numbing her up. Derek apparently was really shook up, and one of the things that happened is Jill lost about half of her blood volume and spent 4 days away from baby Samuel and was actually out unconscious for some hours after the birth. That happens. They did learn something really disturbing. When they were in the hospital with the baby, they learned that the baby had suffered a brain bleed. Okay. This is where I have to stop and rant. Okay. It's not optimal that people's babies have brain bleeds either in utero or shortly thereafter, but it does happen. When I had my last stroke, I was told that they were able to look and see on the MRI I had that I had old damage, that they dated back to maybe prenatal, that I had had a brain bleed, some kind of minor stroke when before I was born. And we've all heard the stories about Jill Rodriguez's youngest having a brain bleed, having a stroke in utero. It happens. It happens in utero. It happens sometimes on newborns. It's bad, but it's not the end of the world. It doesn't mean the child is going to be brain damaged for the rest of their lives. It is what it is, and sometimes you can't even prevent those things at all. PR Chad wanted a picture. He wanted a picture of the baby to post on social media and for TLC. He was told no. I was glad to read that postpartum that Michelle Duggar actually helped a lot. She showed up did the laundry, helped where she could to help Jill recover. Because recovering from, C-section is about like recovering from a hysterectomy. It's major abdominal surgery, okay? And it ain't fun. And they were told they had to have Samuel scanned at 2 months. They did, and there was no lasting damage from the brain bleed, thankfully. Most of the time there's not, but you never know. And TLC was still refusing to give them official paperwork showing that they were separated from the show. Refused to release them. So they couldn't go back to El Salvador. They couldn't raise the funding for it, and they couldn't get the IMB funding for it. So Derek decided to sign up for a year-long ministry residency program right there where they lived. And Jill started talking about with sweet freedom to move into the ministry's housing. And nobody really knew what the status of her fertility was going to be after these two, count them, horrible birth things. Nobody really knows. So she was upset and feeling guilty because the IBLP's teachings on infertility. She felt guilty that she might possibly have infertility. And that's one of those things that drives me nuts about these people and about the IBLP is how they blame that stuff on the people suffering it. I am not surprised that Jill and some of her sisters have had issues giving birth. When you're raised in a family where you don't have proper nutrition as you're coming up and your body is having to build itself less than optimal fuel, I was wondering if the births were going to go haywire, and some of them had. And I really think it leads back to that. It's their early years, what they weren't fed, that I believe created some of these problems. But that's just me thinking that. Do your own research, come to your own conclusions on any of this crap. Jill finally mentioned the Gothard accusations. Okay, and if you don't know what those are, Bill Gothard had initially like 34 women that filed a lawsuit against him alleging that he had touched them and more. This guy who bragged he never even kissed a woman. He'd been kissing some of these gals and he had been touching them, some of them over their clothes, some under their clothes. One gal was claiming that he raped her. It was pretty scandalous. And the IBLP actually removed Gothard from leadership capacity. They kicked him out, even though it was his organization that he started. They kicked him out. And then later, 10 more women came forward. So it was pretty obvious something awful was going on in that time, that when he was getting all of those teenage girls with curly hair and navy blue skirts and white shirts, he was doing things to them. I am not surprised. Jill says she still held on to the beliefs about children are a blessing. The whole quiverful thing that her family practices and says, no, we are not quiverful. Look, you can call a rhinoceros a stumpy, horny thing, but guess what? It's still a rhinoceros. You can't just make up names and say, oh, no, that's not us. That's not us at all. You can't do that. It doesn't work like that. And Jill did something that I was really shocked when I read because of how much demonic emphasis I saw placed upon that in my old church and the IBLP and everywhere else. She used birth control. Birth control after Israel's birth until she was healed. She rightly pointed out that her midwife training said that you need to wait 18 months between births. I think that's a good thing. And I tried to practice that myself. Even though I have kids that are 3 years apart. So she used birth control and she wrestled with the idea of infertility. IBLP didn't help because in their teachings they say that if you have a small family, that the mother and father are lazy and fear filled. And I can tell you that is not true. I was one of those mothers that was treated that way by people who follow the IBLP. I think my first shocking encounter with that was when my one of my best friends at my old church and I, when I was helping her pack up for a move, and she had 13 kids, I think, at the time. And she introduced me to another friend of hers from another church because she knew I only had 3 kids as her semi heathen friend. Really, she really introduced me like that. And I was so shocked that she would describe me in those terms. It pretty much wrecked the friendship. I found myself doing the Texas two-step away from her from now on. And I'm glad I did. It took her 4 or 5 years before she reached the state I was and ended up leaving. But instead of trying to heal from the whole crazy thing and trying to do deconstruction, she ended up just going somewhere else and drinking a different flavor of Kool-Aid. So that's all I got today. This is about, I know that I'm taking forever to review this book, but like I said, this book is very triggering to me. So I have really had to do this slowly and carefully, and just look at everything and figure out where it lays with the theology. And I'm glad I did. And now I have to talk a little tiny bit. I hate to do this, about Katie Joy Paulson. I have to clarify a few things because this also has to do with the Duggars and her allegations about the Duggars and the book. Okay, a couple of days ago, Katie Joy started trumpeting loudly that she was talking to Alice. If you don't know who Alice is the person that it is alleged borrowed a book from the Holtz, a book in which the Holtz daughter had written a letter to Josh, a nasty letter detailing all of his sins and saying, I'm breaking off my relationship with you because of X, Y, and Z. She put that letter in a book. It was just an exercise to get rid of the anger she felt because, like I said, IBLP and different quiverful evangelical churches teach that anger is wrong, that if you have anger, it's always wrong. That's not so. Anger is a healthy, normal human emotion to have. So this Alice borrowed this book from the Holt family, found the letter, asked at her church, was told by the church membership what had happened in detail, and then sent a letter to Oprah saying, or an email to Oprah saying, I know you're filming the Duggars right now. Please do not use them, and this is why. So that was the first appearance of these allegations in print in any way, shape, or form that I know of. It happened in 2005, I want to say. And this stopped Oprah using the 2 episodes that she had filmed with the Duggars because she started doing her own research into it, found there was truth to this, and just stopped it right there. Now, she didn't expose them in any way, shape, or form, but she said, no, I can't have anything to do with you guys, and just ended it completely. So this Alice did this, and Alice was the whistleblower. So here we had Katie Joy Paulson saying, I have found Alice. Alice contacted me. Alice gave me all this information, blah, 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 blah. There's only one problem. The Holtz and others that were close to this real Alice, said years ago that Alice had passed on because she wasn't a young woman. So unless Katie Joy Paulson is using a Ouija board or this silly thing or a psychic medium, she ain't talking to nobody. Or somebody is trolling her. It could well be somebody is just trolling the hell out of her. So I have to talk about how silly that is. And she's doubling down on it. It's actually amusing to watch. I'm watching this and I am laughing. But I have to say this, back when her and I were in contact and we worked together at Pathos, and then later when she started doing YouTube videos and I was still writing for Pathos, we had contact with the same unnamed Duggar insiders that frequently sold their info to the tabloids. And we would hear all the same things. The difference is she would run with it. I would say, pictures or it didn't happen. Not literal pictures, but if I could confirm what was said with some other backing information that I knew was true, or there was evidence, evidence, that stuff that shows that something is 100% true, I wouldn't use it in NLQ. And this became vitally important back when Homeland Security raided Josh's business, because we were both getting photographs and information about Homeland Security raiding buildings on the property too, which Jim Bob Duggar was like, remain calm, nothing to see here, we have not been raided. I believe they probably raided Josh's house too. So while this was going on, the things that I could confirm that I had photos of, I shared. She shared everything. That was the difference between the two of us. And we actually had sort of a falling out about that, because I said, F it all. I'm sharing her information and calling it a rumor. So I did that too. And she lost it. Said, you were sharing what I shared with you in confidence. I didn't know at that time that she had shared everything I had ever told her in confidence about the Duggars that I had heard from unnamed Duggar insiders. And that was around the same time she asked me about selling info to the tabloids. And I made a joke and said, I make $50,000 a month selling all the Josh's secrets, which I was being very sarcastic and flip about. I wasn't even being remotely truthful. It was me picking at her, wanting to know how to make all this money off the Duggars. And because she has issues understanding what is said and what happens and what's done, she thought I was honest to God, telling her the 100% truth, and instead of the fact that I was being about as sarcastic and flip as I could ever be, because I am one of those people, I'm filled with sarcasm. Many times, sarcasm and snark. And she took all of that. But I saw the way the land laid then, and it was like, okay, I see how you are. I'm just not going to have anything further to do with you, girl. And I cut off most of my relationship with her at that point. That would have been November of 2017. Oh, wait a minute. I'm sorry. No, November of 2019. Time flies when you're having fun. So we didn't talk again until I think it was April or May of 2020. It was after the start of COVID, but not extremely far after it started. And that time we had a very short window of conversation before she asked me to be on her YouTube channel, set up a time and day, knowing that I had to double med to be able to do this because I was having a biblical bout of asthma from hell. And then she stood me up without a word, which was more painful than anything else. So she stood me up. I had various people like Steve McRae contact me to tell me what was going on. I had others tell me that she had been using my information for years about the Duggars, and I took a look at that and saw it was true. She was using the Duggars, the things I told her about the Duggars, stuff from my Pathos column as fodder, and claiming it was her own super secret information that she had exclusive. Girl, no. So saying that she is trying to claim that somebody who's known to be dead is alive and telling her stuff is just too funny. Don't believe anything coming out of her mouth. She doesn't have sources. If she does, she has the same sources as everybody else. It's as simple as that. So now I feel like I got to go take a shower, even though I got to get in the pool, because anytime I talk about Katie Joy Paulson, I feel grimy afterwards. I feel grimy now. But I could not let her lies pass, particularly since I was semi involved because of the years covering the Duggars. I could not let her continue to lie and pretend it was honest to God the truth. Okay, you guys, love you. Have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your Wednesday. And I hope to have my YouTube channel doing lives again here soon. I don't know what's going on. I thought it was the people who had crowded into Guanacaste for Dia de Independence. But it's clearly I got something else going on. Okay, I will see you later. Thanks for watching.